Hello plant friends. My name is Jimmy. I'm a doctor and tropical plant hobbyist in LA, and I make videos about plants, and I think that's basically it. I basically just make videos about plants. When we're talking about soil mixes or soil mixtures for Monsteras or Aroids in general, you'll find that there are a lot of formulations and recipes on forums, on the internet, even on YouTube. But I personally find it pretty ridiculous that there could be someone out there telling you that they know the perfect soil mixture for you without knowing your plant, your environment, or your watering habits. I also find it a bit strange that some recipes and formulations call for like 10 different items to compose this perfect soil mixture. I mean, is it really that complicated? It's not rocket science, right? It's soil. It shouldn't be that hard. So in this episode, I'm going to do a soil tour of several of my Monsteras to show you that soil mixtures do not have to be very specific. They also don't have to be very complicated for them to work and your plants to do well. Let's roll this first clip. For my elbow, I think I shared what I have for this mix already. Lots more of, I would say, fine bark or smaller pieces of bark, perlite. I remember when I was doing the mix for this elbow, I recently had root rot on one of my other variegated Monstera, so I was very cautious with this mix, and I probably put more bark than I probably should have. So this one, my friends recently stayed over and they commented how super dry the soil was, and I agree that I tend to keep my soil on the much drier side. This guy dries out pretty quickly. I would say I just watered this a couple days ago, and I'm probably not going to water again for I'd say like 4 or 5 more days. But as you can see, this elbow has been doing really well. Yeah, even though the soil is dry most of the time, you see that the white parts are generally pretty good. There's some patches that I'm just attributing to elbowness. Here's the newest leaf, which is looking absolutely amazing, and all the whites are still really white. If I kept a better eye on the dryness of the soil and watered it more optimally, it would probably grow a little bit faster than it does. But yeah, so far it's been doing really well. I'm sure a lot of us have watched our moms or grandmas cook, right? And they're always like, oh, you know, let's add some sugar and add some salt or some pepper. And when you ask them like, oh, how much to add, they're like, oh, just this much, right? They're never really measuring anything. And also, if a recipe calls for a certain ingredient and you may not have it around, they're always like, oh, it's okay. We'll just like substitute it or use something else, right? So how is it that they can, you know, put together ingredients and flavors without exact measurements? The reason grandmas and moms and good chefs can do this is that they understand flavor profiles, right? So as long as you can follow the ranges of a flavor profile, your dish can come out pretty well, even if you're not using exact measurements or using the exact ingredients. So if we apply this concept of a flavor profile to soil, or a soil profile, it's not completely a foreign concept. I'm sure you guys have seen bags of orchid mix or cactus mix at your big box stores, right? Those are flavor or soil profiles for orchids and cactus. Different brands will have, you know, different compositions, but they're all within this range, or, you know, this profile that's appropriate for cactus or orchids and cactus. And even regular run-of-the-mill potting mix is a soil profile for, you know, most common indoor plants. Unfortunately, there's no commercially available Monstera profile soil mix, so we have to make our own. Though that may sound a little like daunting or intimidating at first, it's actually the best way to do things. Airy and well draining. That is the soil profile for Monsteras. Airy and well draining. That is their preference. That is what they like. That is what you're aiming to achieve.
So for these plants, when I was potting these plants, I forgot where my perlite was. Honestly, I think it wasn't me forgetting. I think I was just too lazy to go outside and get my perlite bag. So you see there's very little perlite in here. I think whatever perlite was here was from some reused soil or provided as part of the orchid mix. These pots are very, very heavy on the coarse orchid mix. You have some spag moss that I had just lying around. So, you know, very, very little fine perlite, very little potting soil. If you look at my soil, none of the pots look the same, and that's just because I always have different things on hand, and I use whatever I have on hand instead of always having, 10 or so different ingredients or separate bags of soil mixes at my house. When I have a lot of big pieces of bark lying around, I use that. And when I don't, then I use smaller pieces or orchid mix. When I have just spare sphagnum moss or extra sphagnum moss from somewhere else lying around, I add that to my mix as well. So I literally just use whatever I have on hand.
How you achieve a airy and well-draining soil mixture is really up to you. It's up to your budget. It's up to how complicated or simple you want to be. It's up to the materials you have on hand or that you can acquire or that's in your environment. You can be very flexible with the ingredients and the composition as long as you achieve the profile of being airy and well draining. All my soil mixes for Monsteras vary. It varies like from pot to pot, day to day, because it really is up to the ingredients I have on hand and the ingredients I sort of want to use. At any particular time, I really only have 3 to 4 bags of soil ingredients with me. So one is a basic potting soil mixture, just the run-of-the-mill potting soil for indoor plants. I normally have a bag of orchid mix, which usually includes like larger pieces of bark and some large pieces of perlite and charcoal. It's, just a regular cheap orchid mix. Then I usually have a bag of perlite, and then I sometimes have a supplemental or extra bag of small pieces of bark. So that's it. I have usually 3 bags, sometimes 4 bags that I sort of just combine together to create a, airy and well-draining soil. I don't have 10 bags of different stuff lying around. I try to make my soil compositions very simple, very practical. I don't like having tons of different soil bags around. I don't have the space for it, and also it really doesn't fit into my decor.
So this one is some of the Monstera Perus that I have recovering at my place. One is recovering much better than the other. This one, I think this is a really good mixture for them, especially for recovering plants that I feel I always keep on the drier side to prevent root rot. I think that struggling or recovering plants are more susceptible to root rot than healthy plants. So this mixture is very well draining. You can see it's very chunky. Some orchid bark. You don't really you know that there's some soil in here, but there's definitely not chunks of soil, right? There's a good variation of particle or substrate size and density. So the water drains through this really easily, and the chunkiness helps the soil retain its aeration. Adding larger chunks of orchid bark, even though there's not that much larger chunks in here, adding larger chunks of orchid bark prevents compaction of the soil over time, which decreases their aeration over time.
I think a lot of people have this impression that soil mixtures have to be, really complicated or really sophisticated for them to work. But that's really not true. And I feel that all the sources that you've been reading that give you that impression is doing you a disservice. Because I think that it's turning soil into something that's more intimidating than it really is. If you talk to growers or nurseries, think about the growers and sellers in like Thailand. Do you think that they're going around having 10 or so different bags of ingredients and taking all the time to mix it up? No. A lot of soil mixtures that you see nurseries and growers use is really, really simple. If anything, I feel like a lot of it is mostly just like 2, at most 3 ingredients. Some growers use a very, very high proportion of perlite, and then other growers, I think, use either a high proportion of bark or like coconut husk. But usually when you look at the soil, their mixtures are very simple. The proportions, though, will be a bit different from what you're used to because the proportions are managed in such a way that it creates an airy and well-draining soil for their particular growing situation.
So this one is my Monstera epipenoides. I had some moss lying around, so I just tossed it in there. This one has a little bit more chunks of bigger bark pieces. You can see lots of white, lots of perlite, and some soil mixed in there. The key that I like to stress is keeping the soil chunky. It allows for aeration and also good drainage. I would say that this is very typical of most of my mixtures. A very chunky soil, right, with some chunks of bigger pieces of bark as well as smaller pieces of bark.
If you're enjoying the content so far, please like, please subscribe, hit that bell icon if you don't want to miss any of my future episodes. And also comment. Let me know what other questions you have. Let me know what you use for your soil composition. Are you a 10 ingredient soil person?
So these are some more epipenoides. And when I was potting this guy, I obviously had a lot of perlite lying around. So lots of perlite, little on the orchid mix or fine bark, just because I really just didn't have it lying around while I was making this. So I'm very, very flexible with my substrates as long as it's following the principle of keeping the soil well draining and aerated. So if I have less orchid bark or less of anything on that particular day and I have more of something else such as perlite on this specific day, I use more perlite. If I don't have perlite, then I just use more bark. But you sort of just need something. You need something aerated and chunky and, well draining to add to your potting soil mix if you want your plants to do well.
Soil mixtures do not have to be complex for them to work and for your plant to thrive. Also, you can be pretty practical and pretty flexible with your soil mixture compositions as long as you understand the main, what do we call it? Soil profile, right? Airy and well draining. Airy and well draining. All right, that's it. Thank you for joining me again for another episode. Till next time, plant friends. Happy planting.